Let's continue now with this month's Sand Creek anniversary and what it tells us about history and politics. A new Colorado Experience episode about the massacre will be broadcast for the first time on November 27th here on Rocky Mountain PBS. It sets the scene, the end of the Civil War, when the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes had earlier been granted by treaty a large portion of eastern Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska as their forever home to roam and hunt and live. But then came the gold rush when miners flocked to Colorado, opening the way for the boom of settlers arriving in huge wagon trains from the east. And the people who wanted to move the Colorado Territory ahead to statehood came to believe these Native Americans were an impediment. Former Colorado Chief Historian David Hollis picks up the story from there.
Something had to be done. The land that these miners were occupying was already spoken for. So a new treaty was arranged in 1861 called the Treaty of Fort Wise. That treaty was signed by a fraction of the chiefs, one of whom was Black Kettle. And it reduced that great tract of land to a small triangular piece of barren land anchored on the Arkansas River in southeastern Colorado.
Which was a big sand field with no food, no buffalo, no fishing, no nothing. So a lot of our conflicts started when we was out of our boundaries hunting.
So when Governor Evans arrived in Colorado, he arrived in I guess you could say a hotbed. Decisions had to be made. Somebody had to take the reins and lead the territory towards statehood. I imagine one might say Governor Evans' agenda was a visionary. It was expansionism. Colorado would become a state.
John Evans, when he came as territorial governor in May of 1862, he had a fine reputation. He was an entrepreneur, a builder, and a very prominent Methodist. He was a strong abolitionist, very much against slavery. Now, remember that this is all occurring in the middle of a civil war. Slaves, he understood. But when it came to Indians, Evans believed that they didn't possess souls, that they were heathen savages, and they were infernal. All words that he used to describe Indian people.
They were an impediment to civilization. And I think a lot of John Evans' motivations and a lot of John Evans' vision, it couldn't be fulfilled without the removal for economics' sake, for civilization's sake of the tribes on the Eastern Plains.
A war was going on. The Colorado troops consistently, repeatedly attacked peaceful villages.
That is a clip from a brand new episode of Colorado Experience set to air on Rocky Mountain PBS Thursday, November 27th. Joining me in studio now are two of the people from a study committee at the University of Denver who recently completed their own look at the Sand Creek Massacre in connection with the 150th anniversary of both the event and the school. Dr. Nancy Wadsworth is an associate professor in the DU Political Science Department, and with her from the DU English Department is Dr. Billy Stratton, whose PhD is in American Indian Studies. As you just heard, Governor John Evans did not come out of this looking very good, and he was forced to step down as governor later. But this was also a man who was a giant in the settlement of the American West. He brought railroads, and he was responsible for the founding of many institutions. So what do you think? Was this removal of Indians some aberration in his career?
I would say that aftermath of the decisions that he made that led to the Sand Creek Massacre were disastrous for his political career. And for a while, he labored under the shadow of what had happened, of being forced to resign and all the humiliation that came with that. But he proved quite resilient in terms of his larger reputation, his work as an entrepreneur, his efforts to help Colorado secure statehood, and his efforts to get the railroads, or a branch of the railroad, to come through Colorado. So in many ways he rebounded, and it's also important to keep in mind that many settlers in the territory still defended John Evans and saw him as a hero, and didn't understand the vociferous critiques coming from the East about him. What I would say, though, is that though these were a dark few years, the years that he served as governor, that founding institutions and being a civilizer went for this man, like many leaders of his time, hand in glove with the removal of Indians. He did not see any place for them but on a reservation. And so it's not that this is one dark area of his character, this is just a sort of natural outgrowth of his worldview.
Very interesting. And this study, coming as it does on the anniversary, Bill, this was something that Northwestern University first looked at because they too were founded by John Evans. And then you heard from someone there at Northwestern, is that right?
Yeah, I was contacted by Carl Smith in regards to their report, and because I was the faculty advisor to the Native Student Alliance, but at the time I was out of the country, or just getting ready to go out of the country, and so I then got him into contact with other people at DU who were interested in Native issues, and then they took the lead in starting a committee to address the same questions.
And I would say that our committee emerged somewhat organically from faculty and students who were interested in looking at this issue that had never been taken up by DU in 150 years, and which we haven't talked about very much on our campus. The role, we talk about the Sand Creek Massacre, it's part of the memory in Colorado and at DU. We have talked very little bit about the role of our founder, though it was known that he played a role. We never had looked at it systematically, and because we were celebrating the 150th anniversary of the university, which is 2 weeks before the 150th anniversary of the massacre, we thought this was an incredible opportunity, since the university was ready to look back at its past, was asking for people to propose things, events, exhibits, talks, lectures about our past, that this would be an unusually good opportunity to take a look at this.
And the way it came down is that he really didn't look good in all of this. As Nancy has explained, he didn't see a problem.
No, and what John Evans did is, Nancy mentioned part of this worldview that he had, but the worldview was a much larger worldview that had probably been present in this country since the Puritans. The notion of westward migration, this binary configuration of civilization versus savagery, Native people as inferior, so on and so forth. And so Native people in much of American history were seen as inconvenient holders of the land.
What made the difference, Nancy? Why did the people in the East say, gasp, what is this all about?
They were alarmed by a number of features of this, and it's true that by 1864 many people in the East lived in urban centers or in places that had been colonized and that no longer had much contact, if any, with Native Americans or Native people who had been moved. They didn't get citizenship till much later, so Native American is not actually really the appropriate term for this period. Right. They were outraged and scandalized by the fact that the tribes, the Cheyenne and Arapaho, who were at Fort Lyon, had been sent there by a governor after they had requested peace from this same governor who had asked peaceful Indians to come forward and identify themselves so that they could be protected at the forts. And then they were attacked. It was also the way that they were attacked, which was not exceptional for Indian massacres by settlers at the time, but the extent of the atrocities, the fact that soldiers from the 1st Regiment who refused to be part of this, like Silas Soule, wrote in great detail about what happened and just how wrong this was from a military standpoint, and the fact that they had been sort of basically seemingly put in the line of fire by their own, not just territorial governor, but the superintendent of Indian Affairs, which was this office that Evans also held. He was the top Indian official for the territory, so his responsibility was to take care of
quite
tribes.
A scandal from the top down. One last question, Bill. The Northwestern came to a somewhat different conclusion than DU. Can you explain the difference?
The main difference is they focused on culpability in sort of a limited definition of it. And they didn't find him as guilty. They definitely saw him as responsible for some of the things that happened, but because he wasn't in Colorado at the time, he didn't give a direct order to Chivington to carry out the attack. They saw his responsibility as significantly less than Chivington's. And the way we looked at it was that because he was the governor of the territory, the top civilian authority, also a superintendent of Indian Affairs charged with upholding treaties and looking out for the best interests of the Native people in the territory, that he failed in those responsibilities, and thus has a degree of responsibility much higher than what Northwestern determined.
Thank you both very much for this interesting new understanding of an important event in Colorado history. Dr. Nancy Wadsworth and Dr. Billy J. Stratton from University of Denver. And that is Colorado State of Mind for this weekend. You may see the program again at video.rmpbs.org. Next week, a disturbing new story about justice delayed in some campus sexual assault cases in Colorado. Please join us for the details then. I'm Cynthia Hessen of Rocky Mountain PBS iNews. Good night.